It stood just outside our yard, near the sidewalk, where the breeze moved through the leaves like whispers. A small, crooked tree, nothing grand, not even tall enough to cast a proper shadow. But to Ellie it was magical. We called it her wish tree. She chose it one day after a therapy session, placing her first ribbon gently on a low branch, a piece of sky blue fabric from one of her old shirts. She tied it carefully twice and stepped back with a smile, as if she had just told the world a secret. That became her ritual. Every few days, she'd pick a ribbon, some glittery, some plain, and I'd write her wish on it. Her words were limited, but her heart was wide open. I want to see Grandma. No more scary dreams. I want a friend. And sometimes no words at all, just a ribbon tied tightly. Because not every feeling has a name. Neighbors noticed. Some smiled. A few tied ribbons of their own. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a quiet patch of beauty, growing one hope at a time. And then, one morning, we stepped outside, and the tree was gone. Ellie is 8 years old. She has warm hazel eyes that light up when she's near something soft or colorful, and a smile that feels like sunshine breaking through heavy clouds. She was diagnosed with a complex developmental disorder when she was just 2. She doesn't speak in full sentences, and sometimes not at all. Most people don't realize how much she understands, how much she feels. But I do. I've learned to read her cues. The way her eyes linger when she's overwhelmed, the soft hum she makes when she's happy, and the way her fingers curl around mine when she's scared. Her world moves at a different rhythm, slower, more tender, and often misunderstood by the people around us. While other kids her age run across playgrounds shouting to each other, Ellie walks with her hands outstretched, brushing leaves and fences as if trying to hear what they're saying. She feels more than she says, and sometimes, when the words just won't come, they gather inside her like balloons with no strings to hold them. That's why we made the wish tree. It started after one of her therapy sessions when her occupational therapist encouraged us to find a safe, repeatable activity that could help Ellie express emotions she couldn't yet explain. We tried painting, music, sensory bins. They worked in pieces. But nothing gave Ellie the gentle focus she needed. Until one afternoon, she wandered toward the small tree just outside our yard and began touching its branches, one by one, like she was choosing something. I gave her a strip of ribbon from an old craft box. She tied it without instruction, stood back, and smiled. The next day, she did it again. That's when I understood. The ribbons were her words. I started asking what each one meant. Sometimes she'd give me a small word or phrase, sometimes just a nod or a tear. I wrote down what she showed me, gently, in black marker, on each ribbon. I want a friend. Mom's smile. No more pain. No more needles. Blue sky. Some days, the ribbon would be red. That was her color for anger. Other days, yellow joy. One morning, she picked all white ones. When I asked why, she just pointed to her chest and looked up. Peace, I wrote. Every ribbon on that tree became a message from a child who didn't have many ways to speak, but had so much to say. People would walk by and glance. Some smiled, some looked puzzled. But Ellie didn't care. The tree wasn't for them. It was for her. It was a part of her healing, her storytelling, her voice. As her parent, I became the bridge between what she felt and what the world could read. I was her interpreter, not just of language, but of emotion. And in time, the wish tree became more than a coping mechanism. It became her mirror, showing the world the beauty, pain, and wonder inside a little girl most people wouldn't take the time to understand. And now, with that tree gone, it feels like someone tore a page out of her story, one she hadn't even finished telling. At first, the neighborhood pretended to care. When Ellie's wish tree began to blossom with color, ribbons swaying gently in the wind like little messengers of hope, a few neighbors stopped by to say how beautiful it was. One woman left a small note tucked under a ribbon. This gave me peace after my husband's passing. Thank you. A teenager tied on a ribbon with a drawing of a heart and the word strength. For a moment, I believed our little corner of the world had found something rare, compassion. People would walk by, slow down, smile. They asked about Ellie, and I told them her story. Some even tied their own wishes: healing, more time with my kids. I want to feel happy again. The tree quietly became a symbol of shared humanity, of softness, of vulnerability. But then things changed. It started with the glances. The people who used to wave began avoiding eye contact. Some picked up their pace when they walked by, their expressions tight and unreadable. A few stopped bringing their kids by altogether. One man muttered, "That thing's starting to look like a memorial," as he passed by. Then came the whispers. At a block party, I overheard someone say, "It's sweet, but kind of depressing, don't you think?" Another replied, "Honestly, I don't want my kids asking about someone else's grief every time we walk down the street." And then the first letter from the HOA. "Dear resident, it has come to our attention that a non-compliant decorative structure is present on your property. Please remove all non-approved items tied to public-facing trees. Continued disregard may result in fines." No mention of Ellie. No acknowledgement of the tree's purpose. Just policy. Cold, impersonal, mechanical. I tried to explain. I called. I emailed. I invited the HOA rep to walk by and read the wishes for themselves. I even offered to move the tree to our backyard. But the response was clear. Sentimental value does not override HOA appearance standards. Then came the second complaint. This time, the words cut deeper. The tree has become an emotional eyesore. It's starting to feel like a place of mourning. This is a family neighborhood. The tree makes the street look sad. Sad. That word stuck with me. Because if a child's hope, if a ribbon with the words, "I want a friend" or "no more pain" makes a neighborhood uncomfortable, what does that say about the neighborhood? They smiled when it was pretty, quiet, temporary. But when Ellie kept showing up, when the tree kept growing, when her presence became persistent, they pulled away. They didn't want to see her. Not the full her. Not the parts that made them feel something. And so, they pretended to care. Until caring became inconvenient. The first official warning arrived folded neatly in a plain envelope, slipped into our mailbox like any other piece of mail. But I knew the moment I saw the HOA letterhead, this wasn't just another notice about garbage bins or lawn trimming. I opened it on the porch while Ellie tied a new ribbon to her tree, her tongue poking slightly out in concentration as she struggled to get the knot just right. The letter was cold, sterile, not a hint of empathy. It has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association that a non-compliant decorative installation has been added to a publicly visible tree located near your property. This constitutes a violation of Section 3.2 of the Community Aesthetic Guidelines. Please remove all materials within 10 days to avoid fines or further action. No mention of what the tree meant. No recognition that this non-compliant installation was the emotional lifeline of a little girl who didn't have many ways to express herself. I stood there, heart pounding, fingers curling around the letter. Ellie turned to me, holding a new ribbon. Pink, her favorite. She handed it to me, smiling, ready for me to write down her next wish. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced a smile. "What does this one say, sweetheart?" I asked. She thought for a moment, then pointed to her head, then to the sky. "Fly," she whispered. So I wrote, "I want to fly." She tied it carefully, not noticing the tremble in my hands. Later that day, I emailed the HOA. I told them about Ellie, about her therapy, about how the tree wasn't trash or clutter, but a sacred space for a child who had already overcome so much. I attached photos of the ribbons, of Ellie smiling, of the messages others had added. I asked for understanding, compassion, a simple exception. Their reply came 2 days later. "While we sympathize with your situation, sentimentality does not exempt enforcement of HOA policies. The tree and all associated materials must be cleared within the original deadline to avoid penalties. No human signature, just HOA Compliance Committee." I sat at the kitchen table reading that line over and over. Sentimentality does not exempt enforcement. What a sentence! What a perfect example of rules replacing humanity. I didn't tell Ellie about the warning. I couldn't. So she kept going, blissfully unaware of the clock ticking down on something that meant the world to her. She made 4 more ribbons that week. One of them stopped me cold. It was blue, just like the first one she ever tied. She handed it to me gently and said, "Tree go bye-bye." I froze. "What do you mean?" She shrugged and looked away. I wrote what she said. The ribbon read, "Please don't take my tree." And as she tied it on, I knew in my bones someone already planned to. It happened on a Saturday morning, the kind that usually held promise. The sun was barely peeking over the rooftops, casting soft light across our street. I was up early, hoping for a few quiet moments before Ellie woke. I stepped outside with my coffee, expecting to see the usual, the ribbons fluttering in the breeze, Ellie's latest wish tied near the bottom where her little hands could reach. But the tree was gone. At first, I blinked, thinking I was still half asleep. I walked to the curb, heart beginning to race. The space where the wish tree had stood was now bare dirt. Just a small patch of broken roots and torn up grass. No stump, no trunk, no branches, nothing. I turned slowly, scanning the area, and that's when I saw them. The ribbons, dozens of them, crushed, tangled, and half covered with leaves, in the garbage bin at the end of our driveway. Not even our bin. Karen's. I walked over and stared at the mess inside. Some of them still had Ellie's handwriting. One was mine, "No more pain." Another had smudged marker, barely legible. "I want a friend." Glittery pink, bright green, torn and tossed like trash. My stomach turned. I was still standing there, stunned, when I heard footsteps behind me. Karen. She was wearing her morning robe, holding a coffee mug, completely unbothered. She glanced at the bin, then at me with a smirk that made my blood boil. "Oh," she said casually, "I see you noticed." I stared at her. "You did this." She took a sip from her mug and nodded toward the empty space. It was an eyesore. We have guidelines for a reason. The tree made the whole street look depressing. This is a family neighborhood. "A child tied her dreams to that tree," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It meant something. It helped her." Karen shrugged. "I understand your situation, but that doesn't mean the rest of us should have to see it every day." It set the wrong tone. Honestly, it was starting to look like some kind of grief memorial. Not very welcoming. I wanted to scream. Instead, I clenched my fists and turned away. There was no reasoning with someone who looked at hope and saw clutter. Back inside, Ellie had woken up. I found her at the window, peeking through the curtains, looking toward where the tree should have been. She tilted her head. "Tree." I couldn't speak. She opened the door, walked to the edge of the yard, and stood there, frozen. Her fingers twitched. Her eyes scanned the empty ground. She turned to me, holding one of the ribbons she must have been saving for the weekend. "Where ribbon go?" she asked. I knelt beside her, swallowing the lump in my throat. "It's gone, sweetheart. Someone took the tree away." She looked at the ribbon, then at the empty space, then back at me. "Why?" That word hit harder than anything Karen had said. Why? I didn't have an answer. Over the next few days, Ellie kept going back. She'd hold her ribbon, walk to the same spot, and just stand there, waiting, hoping, maybe thinking that if she waited long enough, her wish tree would grow back. But it didn't. And each time, she'd return inside a little quieter than before. They didn't just cut down a tree. They stole her voice. I didn't cry right away. Not when I found the ribbons in the trash. Not when Karen smirked and said the tree looked too sad. Not even when Ellie stood there with a ribbon in her hand and no branch to tie it to. But later that night, when she was asleep, curled up under her blanket with her little box of unused ribbons beside her, I sat at the edge of my bed and finally broke down. The kind of crying that doesn't make sound at first, just shaking. Rage and sorrow twisted together, and for the first time since moving into this neighborhood, I felt completely helpless. I had done everything right. I followed the rules, paid the dues, kept the lawn neat, smiled at neighbors. I tried to be invisible, the quiet parent of a child who couldn't always explain herself. I never asked for sympathy. just space, just dignity, just one tree. But that was too much, apparently. Over the next few days, Ellie changed. She didn't speak much, not that she ever did, but even her expressions dulled. The sparkle in her eyes was gone. She stopped humming. She refused to go on her daily walk, even when I offered to carry her ribbons for her. She still kept them close, but didn't touch them. One morning, I found her at the window again, just staring at the empty space where her tree used to stand. She turned to me and whispered, "My wishes go away?" That was my breaking point. I had held back to avoid drama. I had stayed silent to keep the peace. But silence wasn't protecting us, it was erasing us. So I wrote a letter, not to the HOA, not to Karen, but to everyone, to the neighbors who walked past the tree. You may have seen it, a small, crooked tree covered in ribbons. You may have thought it was odd or maybe even beautiful. That tree belonged to my daughter, Ellie. Ellie is 8. She doesn't speak much, but she feels everything. The ribbons were her way of expressing things she couldn't say out loud. Wishes, fears, hopes. Every color had meaning. Every word came from a part of her that most people never get to see. That tree was her voice, her safe space, her way of saying, "I exist, I matter." And now it's gone. Cut down, destroyed, not by accident but by choice. Someone decided that Ellie's tree made the street look sad, that her ribbons were an eyesore, that her way of communicating made the neighborhood less beautiful. But here's what you didn't see. You didn't see her face light up after tying a ribbon that said "Mom, smile." You didn't see her gently touch each branch before placing a new one. You didn't hear her whisper "fly" or "safe" or "peace" with every knot. You didn't see her healing. Now she stares out the window, wondering where her wishes went. This wasn't just about ribbons. It was about dignity, about a child's right to be seen, fully, honestly, and without shame. To the person who removed her tree, you didn't clean up the neighborhood. You erased part of it, but you haven't erased her. And you haven't erased me. We will find new trees. And this time, we won't ask for permission. I posted the letter online that night, on the neighborhood group, on my personal page, on a few local forums. I didn't expect much, but by the next morning, it had spread further than I ever imagined. The comments started pouring in. Messages from strangers, other parents, teachers, therapists, even other HOA members from nearby communities. I sat on the couch, reading them in disbelief, as Ellie curled up next to me, still quiet, but no longer completely shut down. The world had heard her, and something was beginning to shift. The morning after I posted the letter, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications, messages, shares. I rubbed my eyes and blinked at the screen. The post had exploded overnight. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments, and it wasn't just the usual trickle of sympathy. It was an avalanche of outrage, support, and love. People from our city, and then from other states, had read Ellie's story and were furious. They couldn't believe someone would remove a child's wish tree. They couldn't believe a neighborhood would allow it. Some tagged local news outlets. Others tagged the HOA's page directly. Comments poured in. "This is the most heartbreaking thing I've read all week. That child deserves her tree back. I don't even know you, but please tell Ellie her wishes still matter. Shame on that neighbor. Ellie's tree made the street beautiful. I'm going outside right now to tie a ribbon on my tree for her." By noon, the hashtag wishes for Ellie was trending locally. Photos began flooding in. People were tying ribbons to trees in their own yards, in public parks, around lampposts and fences. Parents shared pictures of their children writing wishes on pieces of fabric. "I want my brother to get better. I wish for hugs all the time. Be kind to the quiet kids." Even teachers began messaging me. A school counselor from 3 states away wrote, "We created a wish wall in our classroom today, inspired by Ellie. Please let her know she started something beautiful." And then, the moment that brought me to tears. That evening, just before sunset, I opened our front door to find something waiting in the yard, a small potted tree. Not tall, but strong. Its branches were already covered in fresh blank ribbons and handwritten tags. A simple sign was tied to the pot: "Wishes welcome here." No signature, no note, just kindness, pure, loud, and undeniable. I stood there in the doorway, frozen. Then I called Ellie. She stepped outside, her steps hesitant. She looked at the tree, then up at me, and then slowly walked over. She touched one of the ribbons gently, then another, and then pulled one off, looked at it, and whispered, "New tree?" I nodded, my voice cracking. "Yes, sweetheart. A new tree. Just for you." She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in days, and ran back inside to get her ribbon box. The internet had done something that the neighborhood wouldn't. It saw her. It heard her. It gave her a voice back. And in doing so, it reminded all of us that when one act of cruelty tries to silence a child, thousands of strangers can speak back in unison and drown it out with love. The pressure on the HOA began building almost immediately after the post went viral. What started as a local outrage quickly spiraled into something far bigger: a conversation about empathy, inclusion, and how easily bureaucracies can crush the vulnerable under the guise of rules. By the third day, a local news station picked up the story. A young reporter stood just a few feet from our torn-up lawn, holding a microphone and speaking into the camera with the now iconic image of Ellie's potted Wish Tree 2.0 behind her. What began as a quiet way for a disabled child to express her emotions has turned into a nationwide symbol of resistance. The HOA that removed the original tree is now facing backlash from the public, disability advocates, and even former residents who say this isn't the first time compassion has lost out to control. That report set off a wave. Emails began flooding the HOA board. So many, in fact, that they had to disable comments on their website. A petition circulated calling for the board to publicly apologize and revise its policies. Within 48 hours, it had over 30,000 signatures. Karen, of course, said nothing. Her blinds stayed shut. Her porch stayed empty. But the silence around her was loud. Neighbors who once nodded in agreement with her rules now avoided her altogether. Someone spray-chalked the sidewalk in front of her home with the words, "She never wanted beauty. She wanted silence." By the end of the week, the HOA board called for an emergency community meeting. The topic? Revisiting guidelines surrounding personal memorials, symbolic art, and expressive decor. I received an official invitation, and I knew I had to speak. That night, the small clubhouse was packed. More people showed up than chairs allowed. Residents stood along the walls, some holding printed versions of my letter, others holding ribbons in their hands. The board sat stiffly behind a long table, clearly aware they were on trial, not just for Ellie's tree, but for what it represented. When my name was called, I stood, walked to the podium, and faced them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told them about Ellie, about how the tree had helped her feel safe, seen, and whole, about how she used it to express herself in a world that rarely understands her, about how cutting it down didn't just destroy something physical, it wounded something far more sacred: her belief that the world would make space for her. Then I paused and turned to the room. If a child tying ribbons to a tree is too much for this neighborhood to handle, I said, then maybe the problem isn't the child. Maybe it's the neighborhood. The room was quiet. Then someone clapped, then another. And then it spread, a standing ovation. When the board reconvened, moments later, they moved swiftly. A vote was called on revising the HOA's guidelines to allow personal symbolic items, including memorials, decorative expressions of healing, and therapeutic installations, with written notice to the board, but without prior approval. The motion passed unanimously, and just like that, Ellie's ribbons were no longer non-compliant. They were protected, respected. As I walked out of that meeting, I didn't feel victorious. I felt vindicated, not for me, but for every quiet child, every misunderstood family, every voice that had been shamed into silence. The rules had changed, but more importantly, so had the hearts behind them. To every parent listening, and every neighbor who's ever walked past someone else's struggle, I want to say this as simply as I can: we live in a world that moves too fast to notice the quiet ones. the kids who don't speak like others, the families who live just a little differently. And when something doesn't fit into the neat little image of normal, people rush to erase it, tidy it up, hide it, cut it down. But what if we slowed down and looked? What if we asked why a child tied ribbons to a tree instead of wondering if it matched the neighborhood decor? I know not everyone will understand what Ellie's wish tree meant. That's okay. Understanding isn't always the first step, curiosity is. A moment of pause, a willingness to ask, is there more to this than I see? That's how empathy grows. To the parents out there, especially the ones raising children with disabilities, with trauma, with tender hearts, I see you. And I know how exhausting it is to constantly advocate, to constantly explain, to constantly stand between your child and a world that wants to either fix them or ignore them. But keep going. Protect their voices, even when those voices are ribbons, gestures, hums, or glances, even when those voices make others uncomfortable, especially then, because the world doesn't get to decide how your child gets to be heard. To the neighbors, the ones watching from porches and driveways and HOA meetings, you have more power than you realize. You get to shape the soul of your street. You get to decide whether the children growing up next door feel safe or silenced. Sadness doesn't make a street ugly. Cruelty does. Silence does. Coldness does. A child's grief or fear or hope expressed through art or ribbons or sidewalk chalk, that's not a stain on the neighborhood. That's the neighborhood showing its humanity. Ellie's tree wasn't about grief. It wasn't about death. It wasn't even about sadness. It was about hope. Hope that someone would understand. Hope that her wishes mattered. Hope that even in a world that doesn't always listen, there might be someone who does. You don't have to understand every ribbon, but please, never be the one who tears them down. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for feeling the story with us. What happened to Ellie's tree was more than a neighborhood dispute. It was a reminder of how fragile kindness can be and how powerful it becomes when we choose to protect it. If Ellie's story touched you, I have a question for you. What would your ribbon say? What would you tie to that little tree if you had the chance? Seedling, drop your wish in the comments, and let's fill the world with hope one message at a time. Whether it's for healing, for love, or for someone who feels unseen, let's make this space a new kind of wish tree, right here in our community. And this isn't the end of Ellie's story. Backhand index pointing right in the next episode, I'll share what happened when Karen tried to block the wheelchair-accessible ramp we built for Ellie, claiming it ruined the symmetry of her sidewalk view. Yes, you read that right. But this time, we had already learned how to fight back, and we didn't fight alone. So, if you believe in truth over tyranny, in community over cruelty, in hope over HOA harassment, bellhop bell, subscribe to the HOA Stories speech balloon, comment your ribbon, wish thumbs up like, and share this video to keep stories like Ellie's alive. Because one ribbon was removed, but now 1,000 are being tied in its place.